Good morning, everybody. First of all, apologies for yesterday's debacle. I think it was more a technical issue from Zoom's end. I think really unfortunate that we could not conduct it yesterday as planned. But again, I think obliged and thankful that you've taken time off on a Sunday to hear me out and probably discuss the thoughts that we've got at our end as well. Having said that, I think it was a fabulous week in the past few days, not just for the U.S. markets but for our own markets as well. The kind of rebound that we've seen from the bottoms or the intraday corrective lows that we had witnessed over the past few days and weeks. I think the tremendous rally in terms of a 23% up move is welcomed with gleeful hands, and the reaction is very obvious. So the initial part would have been more of short covering at this point of time, but whether this market is having a sustainable mode going forward, I think we'll discuss a few facts. So the first initial part of our discussion today, the initial 10-15 minutes, I'll just be discussing the global landscape, how it is playing out at this point of time. We'll then move on to the presentation part, where I think we've collated some interesting data points in terms of the facts that we were just alluding to. Because I think one element in terms of the market moving 23-24%, but keeping an eye on in terms of the actual reality that is happening from a financial standpoint, from a global GDP standpoint, and how global debt and fiscal deficits might actually stack up is going to be extremely critical, because I think you need to gauge the markets from all angles. I think we're all optimists. We all want markets to move in a unilateral direction, but I think that is where the irrationality angle also starts coming through. The market fall, one might argue whether that was irrational. Again, I think the assumptions and the conflicts that we were dealing with, both from in fact from all the three C's. Corona, crude, as well as the credit risk averseness, I think all of these factors did play out in terms of the sharp correction that we have witnessed from the tops of almost 12,430 in the Indian context, almost 29-30 odd thousand in terms of how the Dow was placed a few weeks back. So the initial reaction that has come through, very valid. Is the bounce back valid, and is the bounce back expected to sustain at the current level? I think we witnessed, I think, multiple questions that would still remain unanswered. But I think the number of facts that we've got on the table, in spite of all the trauma that we probably saw from all these three angles, and the number of cases that are still expected to flatten out for the US markets or the Western world as well, specifically, I think, the European markets in general. Whether you talk about the United Kingdom, whether you talk about Netherlands, whether you talk about France, and yes, there has been some positive connotation drawn out from the cases that are flattening and actually coming down in terms of the new cases reported in countries like Spain and Italy. What happens to the Southeast Asian economies where it all emanated from? China has seen a little bit of an increase in terms of imported cases getting reported on the pandemic. And what probably happens in terms of new cases being reported in economies like Singapore, for example, some cases where I think the stats are still showing a flattening line and not a downward curve. Cases in point being Indonesia and Malaysia, for example, and a few of the African sub-Sahara nations as well. So somewhere I think the markets is trying to or have a sign of relief in terms of whether this curve is expected to flatten out over the next few weeks. It will and it should, with the isolation modes that a lot of economies have done through the lockdowns that we're probably witnessing. But that also is going to take a huge hit. And I'll put forth in my presentation numbers, which the IMF has put forth in terms of the deacceleration from a GDP perspective. Secondly, I think from a market standpoint, in spite of all these calamities that we were looking towards, what happened in terms of the US market up move, and in our own context as well, I think that was one of the best moves that one could have seen in the last 45 years. I think over the past few weeks, you had seen a knee-jerk reaction based on both financial and economic deleveraging, which we have not witnessed. As I've repeated in the past, 2008, more of financial deleveraging crisis. This is a combination of both. But I think the market is still trying to fathom with the economic and the overall implications that the market will still have and the risk factors poised with that. Nevertheless, I think the market move that came through, I think one of the best moves that one saw over the last 45 years. Again, I think the comprehending data points that are coming through, I think there are both pluses and minuses that the US economy is throwing out. So the unemployment stats, the unemployment claims that the US markets have thrown out, 21.4 odd million that have filed for unemployment over the past 4 weeks. I think the interesting data point that comes out is post the global financial crisis, and I'll be having an acronym for that, GFC. Post GFC, the number of jobs that were created in the US economy over the next few quarters and years were close to a 21.5, 21.4 million odd. I think the same number has been has applied for unemployment claims in the US market. So that's a very startling fact at this point of time. Again, I think the offsetting effect, as I've been saying, with the best week witnessed in the last 45 years, has been that there have been a lot of corporate bond issuances in the US markets. So as I was reading over the past couple of days, the corporate bond issuances have been on a record spree. And since the capital market has been an access point for using these corporate bond issuances, I think that's a very, very healthy sign that we can actually see coming through the US markets. What it is also doing in terms of the credit spreads, specifically from a US standpoint, is that the credit spreads are narrowing, which again is a positive sign from a credit perspective. What actions the government has done, specifically from the central government side across the globe, whether you talk about the huge fiscal stimulus that has been announced, initially for business purposes, and again, I think for small business owners as well. I think the number of claims that are coming through week after week, I think Congress is actually apprehended in terms of the claim status that they probably need to suffice over the next few days and weeks. Having said that, what probably happens in terms of all the economic facing industries at this point of time, I think the markets have largely presumed that Q1 is going to take a partial hit in terms of an earnings perspective. The larger hit is expected to come through from Q2. Q3 will also have a partial effect coming through as well. So I think the first half, from a global perspective, is largely written off, both from an earnings perspective, except a few industries which are doing amazingly well. So, for example, I think Amazon is hiring people because they're falling short of delivery staff and staff who can work at warehouses. Again, the kind of offtake that they've probably seen from their grocery stores and so on and so forth is 20% higher compared to its nearest competitor. So if you leave aside a few of the industries which get impacted positively, I think a lot of the economic facing industries which have a direct correlation in terms of how GDP moves and how their earnings move, I think that hit is very well presumed to be taking place in the first half. From an Indian context, Q4, I think the numbers which are getting reported at this point of time are clearly pointing out to softness. So whatever numbers have got reported so far and the management commentaries which have come through, I think are clearly pointing out that Q1, as everybody expects in the market at this point of time, is going to be extremely soft. But again, I think the entire thesis that the analyst community is working on is that a large hit will be taken in Q1 from an Indian context as far as FY21 is concerned. Q2 will see marginal recovery starting to come through for a lot of sectors, including the economy-facing sectors, and the second half will be a tremendous recovery. So I think it's a pre-notion that we're probably carrying at this point of time. How data points play out over the next few weeks and months will be extremely interesting, because I think demand curve, whether that comes through on a U curve or a V curve, will be interesting, because the stifling of demand that we've probably seen, the pent-up demand that gets released, does that get released in a way that people go out and spend? Or will those social distancing norms, the fear factor, still play out in terms of going out? Will the savings factor also start coming through? Because you probably need to save a lot more. This was what was witnessed very interestingly at Stats, what was observing in the second half of the year gone by. And the Germans, for example, the German confidence index was clearly pointing out that people were wanting to save more in anticipation of something going wrong. Not at that point of time there was anything related to coronavirus, but I think generally, I think the faltering of global economy and global economy slow down and slowness had probably prompted a lot of Germans to probably save more rather than go out and have a lot of discretionary spending done. So I think the demand curve, as we speak, how does that evolve and how does that emanate over the next few months is going to be interesting from a earnings and a market perspective. Because if that curve takes a longer period of time to come out, you're probably going to see a larger earnings hit taking place. The presumptive factor here is we're probably speaking and expecting earnings to probably hit or degrow by a higher single digits in that tune, which probably also reflects in terms of the Nifty EPS degrowing by higher single digits. But the fact that still remains unanswered is whether this curve elongates and whether this curve takes longer than a quarter or two to come back. That earnings hit can very well come into middle teens. And if that happens, I think the kind of re-rating that one expects in the market, specifically from a forward price earnings multiple with earnings clearly getting downgraded, also gets stifled because I think earnings clearly get deferred off to FY22, and a larger part of the capital expenditure, even from the infrastructure side, gets deferred off because the entire working capital cycle goes for a toss. Having said that, I think whatever debt will start getting ballooned as well. The fiscal stimulus part, which I'll take you through in terms of the presentation as well. I think what happens in terms of the excesses that need to get provided, both in terms of the fiscal deficit that gets elongated from a market perspective, as well as the government borrowing, which gets elongated to bridge that fiscal gap. Again, that needs to be looked into consideration as well. So at this point of time, I think when you're talking from a global perspective, and even from an Indian context, the fiscal deficit is still getting pegged at 3.5% of GDP. We've already got a package of 1.7 lakh crores that have got announced. The exchequer and the large expectation is that there is one more package coming through for stressed out sectors, specifically SMEs, MSMEs, so on and so forth. But again, I think what kind of a package that comes through and how much of a hit will that be on the GDP? So whether the fiscal moves to 5%, 5.5% includes the states, and that goes to higher double digits, I think that is something that we need to comprehend with and be very, very cognizant about as well. Again, I think the expansionary policy that goes through in terms of additional government borrowing and the Indian context, again, 7.8 trillion is what the government is still pegging at. So if you're looking at an expansionary fiscal policy to come through in terms of a fiscal package, that has got announced, and an expected fiscal package expected to come through over the next few days, which the markets will again accept with gleeful hands and show buoyancy in terms of risk on move within the equity markets. The government borrowing will definitely move higher. Now, how much of a fiscal number are we looking at? Whether it's 6%, 7%, are we comfortable with an 8% number? I think that's something that needs to be answered, because the unwinding that gets required over the next few quarters and years is extremely critical as well. Post the global financial crisis, I think, and as the liquidity taps were opened up across the globe, and specifically from an American context with the quantitative easing program, I think the winding up of this program took larger amount of time, which saw those intermittent corrections and huge corrections happening in the market, because the markets were not able to comprehend how the debt is probably shaping up, and debt at this point of time is at serious levels and which can implode if we do not have the right policies in place to unwind this over the next few quarters. I think the convenient policy that is getting implemented at this point of time is getting reflected through the modern monetary policy, as a lot of economists are calling it at this point of time. The government program, as I said, to bridge the fiscal gap is expected to get and go through a huge expansion at this point of time. Therefore, I think what happens in terms of the borrowing program that needs to be mandated means that the modern monetary policy needs to get initiated at the earliest. Now, such a supply coming through, I think the demand for such amount of paper to get absorbed also needs to be required in the markets itself. I think we do not have the bandwidth, not just us, I think the global markets as well, to absorb that kind of a paper. And that's why I think the central bankers come into action. We've seen this in the past. So from an Indian context, again, between 92 and 97, the Reserve Bank of India actually had the financing of around 25 to 30% of the fiscal deficit of the government through such means. So So in my opinion, again, I think RBI will need to step in the right way to probably absorb this kind of paper that the government throws up. And I think that will be one of the mandatory requirements that RBI will be required to do as this program starts getting unwinding or winding, starts getting wound downwards in the next few days and weeks. The second element obviously has been in terms of how the debt to GDP ratios pan out, and debt to GDP ratios obviously are showing an increasing trend. So I'll take you through very, very interesting facts that we have collated over the last few days and how the debt to GDP is actually moving. Now coming to the other C element, the pandemic element which we spoke about in the initial part of our conversation. Clearly, I think the news which had the market in positive spring was the news that Gilead had announced a drug which was proving to be very, very effective. Now, Gilead's drug, Remdesivir, I think that's the technical name given for the drug at this point of time. Remdesivir showed positive traits for a controlled, for a very selective group based out of Chicago. But what happens is that the data that gets released at this point of time, to a large extent, is that there is no large control group. There was a specific targeted audience at this point of time, and a large element of that got displayed in terms of how the data points threw up. So I think if you probably look at the tests and the results itself, I think it's largely anecdotal at this point of time. But again, I think we need to wait for data, and that's why I said I think we need to have the other eye placed on how the dynamics are moving. Yes, it's fine, and it's absolutely good news that if such a kind of a drug is absolutely is working fine on patients, and if Remdesivir actually starts working very, very effectively, I think a larger group needs to get effective results from. So I think it has to be largely placebo controlled, and that again is going to take time. So I think we have taken it with both hands at this point of time, but how these tests emanate going forward will be interesting. The third element obviously is what happens in terms of the credit risk awareness itself, and there again I think a large element is how markets will perceive credit paper. As I said, I think the US corporate issuances have been very, very effective through the capital markets, and credit I mean the bond risk, the credit risk is the spreads thereof are narrowing, which is a positive sign for the markets itself. From a currency perspective, you've probably seen the Indian rupee depreciate quite significantly against the dollar. But what you've also seen is that a lot of Latin American countries have seen further depreciation against the dollar at this point of time. So how we are placed in terms of the flight of capital towards dollar-denominated assets is something that we will see in the beginning and over a period of time as well. I think that was how the markets have shaped up at this point of time. I will now take you through the presentation, which will have two aspects. The first aspect of the presentation is more and largely based on the premise of how global debt is getting stacked up and how the GDP numbers are getting stacked up from an IMF perspective as well. And the second element is how the numbers have been placed in the earlier crisis and how different sectors performed from a market recovery standpoint. So I'll take you through the presentation in terms of all these relevant data points. Yeah, so I think when we're talking about how the market is shaped up, I think the rally that we've seen from the bottom of 23 odd percent from the intraday corrective lows of 7,500 odd. Yes, there has been a reasonable amount of a V-shaped recovery that the markets have exhibited at this point of time, but a large element on how different sectors will play out over the next few quarters is going to be extremely encouraging for the markets in general. So again, I think whatever we'll discuss from a stock perspective is just informative. This is not a recommendation in any sense, and all such elements are used for educational purposes. All the data points that you've probably taken, I think the sources are clearly mentioned there. So that is for your information itself. So the first element in terms of keeping a watch out in terms of how global debt is shaping up is extremely critical. What we as market participants focus upon is one element of the market perspective as well. So I think the stimuluses that have got announced, the rate cuts that have been initiated by a lot of central governments, central bankers across the globe, I think all that is in fine metal and fine metal as well. But what largely happens to the other element, because you need to balance your balance sheet as well. If you're printing money, if you're printing liquidity into the system, you should ensure that debits and credits are matching up. So with that context again, how global debt is shaping up needs to get reflected very, very clearly. Now, what we saw up from the paper that we analyzed that got released by IIF is that global debt across all sectors for the financial year gone by have actually come out to be at $255 trillion. If you probably look at the global financial crisis and the kind of global debt at this point of time, it is $87 trillion higher, which now means that on a global scale, global debt across sectors compared to global GDP, we're actually at 322 odd percent. You should probably add a lot more of the sectors in terms of government borrowings and so on and so forth as well. And then I think if you get two broad assumptions as per the paper and what they've discussed in the paper itself, in terms of the nominal GDP actually contracting, as I said, with demand actually taking a little bit longer to recover, it will actually mean, and if you probably assume a 2.5% or 3% cut in terms of a nominal GDP, and the expectations of the borrowing mix still expected to get higher, that number then starts moving higher in excess of 350, 370 odd percent in terms of global GDP. Now, what the paper is clearly pointing out, and what is very, very eminent at this point of time, as I discussed from the US stats figure as well, a sharp contraction in corporate earnings is assumed. You've already seen huge unemployment claims in the US markets in excess of 21 odd billion. And that probably is something which is fueling the excessive debt burden that is seen into the system at this point of time. If you just look on a monthly basis in terms of the government debt and the program that a lot of governments are doing in terms of bridging, as I said, their fiscal gap, and where again I think the entire government borrowing on a gross basis actually starts moving significantly higher. That has shown a monthly record of 2.1 trillion for the month of March. If you look at a general scenario in the past few quarters and past few years as well, I think that number was close to 0.9 odd trillion. So you're actually seeing an increase of almost 1.2 trillion odd dollars in the month gone by, which is a significant increase that one needs to understand to bridge that gap. Now, a lot of economies and how the entire stack up is happening in terms of emerging market debt as well. Emerging market debt has shot up significantly. So emerging market debt is close to 71, 75 odd trillion dollars at the end of March. And that has shown a significant increase over the past few years. What was languishing at around 140 odd or 120 odd percent in terms of global GDP has actually moved up to around 220% of global GDP from an emerging FX outstanding debt exposure perspective. The third element obviously is how household debt is stacking up at this point of time. And household debt largely has increased significantly as well. So that is almost around 48 odd trillion dollars. And it will be surprising to know, I think, a lot of economies which are more advanced at this point of time have significantly raked up household debt. It's Switzerland, Norway, Canada that have actually stacked up this significant amount of debt component as well. One more element in terms of the non-financial corporate debt that has actually eked higher as well, and that has significantly gone higher from almost 60-70% of GDP to almost 90 to almost 100 odd percent of GDP at this point of time. And then there is the inherent problem in terms of the other developing or the emerging nations debt, both in terms of forex exposure on a corporate side, which has gone up significantly. So countries like Argentina, a lot of LATAM countries, Colombia, for example, have seen and contributed significantly to this element of debt exposure as well. So it's all fine that fiscal stimuluses have got announced, but what had also been a factual case ever since the global financial crisis, I think the unwinding of this paper which got released, or the liquidity which got released, that unwinding probably took a long time to unwind itself. So with the kind of GDP numbers, with the kind of debt raking up that we are seeing across emerging economies, across developed countries, the household debt increase, the non-corporate financial debt increase, that significantly has a say in terms of global financial dynamics. How we will unwind clearly depends in terms of how the stress in the economy start coming out over the next few quarters. The presumption, as I said, is the next couple of quarters. if God forbid that takes 1 or 2 quarters more, I think that entire equation goes for a toss, which means that the financial offsetting which is expected to take place in the second half will get very well delayed to the first half of the next financial year. Now, as I said, I think most of the facts that I mentioned have been displayed through this chart. The paper also discloses, as I said, household debt, financial sector debt, non-financial sector debt, and government debt actually getting raked up quite significantly. The household debt still manageable compared to the others, but again, I think if you look at all the last few financial crisis years, I think this year itself has shown a significant increase, and we are hardly 1 month into the crisis period as we see. A large element again in terms of how the increase has happened, I think it's more to do with how the non-financial sector and the general government debt has actually increased significantly. So I think the financial sector has become far more conscious since the financial crisis has happened. I think what has happened in terms of the spread movements also between unsecured and secured paper in the US market, I think what we probably saw at the peak of the global financial crisis, we're nowhere close to that. So I think what we're probably seeing is more of a debt increase happening from the non-financial sector side and the general government debt, which has been taking up, as I said, in excess of $1.2 trillion on a monthly average basis. So I'll just take a minute, just a second to pause so you can just state the data that has been put out in the paper. Again, as I said, if you look at how the economies are stacked up, I think a lot of LATAM nations have stacked up the emerging FX outstanding debt, which has got raked up. A lot of household debt has actually got raked up with a lot of developed economies, which include the likes of Switzerland, as I said earlier, including Norway and Canada. So this is another interesting element that Bloomberg and the paper threw up. And this element actually points out to the redemption pressures that can also be witnessed in the market. So come FY20 and the end of this year, the kind of expansionary modes that we've seen through fiscal stimulus is getting announced by a lot of nations. Almost 20 trillion of bond and loan issuances which have happened in the past and which are due for maturity at the end of 2020 actually come up for redemption. Now that itself is a very, very scary figure, because if you don't have the resources to probably start building in, with the expectations of demand supply dynamics meeting up and the second half actually throwing up the huge results as everybody expects, specifically from a pent-up demand perspective, and if that does not emanate, how these redemptions and repayments are going to happen, or whether they get deferred to the next year, which again is not a good sign from a credit rating or a credit risk perspective, something that that question mark clearly needs to get addressed. Here again, I think almost 23, 25% so 1/4 of this debt is coming in through the emerging market itself. So I think the entire scenario that I was speaking earlier in terms of emerging market currencies, I think there is a lot of apprehension, not just from a capital market perspective, but even from a bond and a credit market perspective, which is needed to get addressed at this point of time. So again, I think the refinancing that needs to be done is almost of 730 odd billion to the end of 2020. And again, I think how that happens, both for the US markets, both for the emerging markets, whether you've got debt ceiling patterns again being hit for the US market itself, whether you've got again concerns being raised on how these debt levels can get raised if you're not able to raise capital in the second half, and how emerging market debt is going to get addressed, specifically from a lot of economies in Southeast Asia, a lot of economies in Latin America. If those economies don't shape up, that's going to be one interesting aspect we watched out for. The third element also is in terms of crude prices, and the deal that happened between Russia and Saudi Arabia of 10 million odd barrels being cut. I think there was a similar note which came out in terms of the demand, which a lot of people are expecting, which will remain extremely soft over the next few quarters. So in that respect, again, what happens specifically for a lot of paper that gets released, specifically in international markets that have been raised, a lot of interest obligations that need to get serviced by global oil and gas companies. I think that perspective also needs to be taken into account. And for that, I think crude prices moving a tad bit higher from the current levels need to be mandated, because that actually ensures that the cash flows of all these companies actually remain in positive terrain, which can be used to service their interest and debt obligations. Because if crude prices remain low, I think that also is not a very, very positive sign, because demand is clearly going up, which means that the demand recovery is expected to take time. And there again, I think you're expected to see a large element of defaults that can actually shape up and shape through. So having said that, again, I think this perspective needs to be clearly understood from a market participation as well, and that angle also has to be on our consideration when we are viewing data points. So yes, I think crude moving lower, very, very good sign for India in terms of our import bill going down, the trade deficit number going down. But if it stays low for an extended period of time, the other elements or the other implications that come through can be quite significant, as I just discussed. Now, apart from the IMF paper, IMF had also put out a very interesting note. And from this note, I think we had come out with the discussion for today. I think whether we will see a V-shaped recovery or whether that can be any alphabet shape that you're probably expecting to see over the next few quarters. But the latest note that IMF has come out with, and they're actually having parallels drawn with the Great Depression that was witnessed in the 1930s. So what IMF has called out is that the great crisis is the great lockdown. So unlike the Great Depression, which actually took markets lower for a significant period of time, I think the lockdowns that have been initiated across economies, across countries in the globe, and the extended period of these lockdowns have clearly shrunk global GDP. So they are expecting global GDP to shrink, and the global economy is expected to shrink by 3% over a relative period of time. But for this fiscal year itself, there can be a sharp contraction in GDP that one can witness. So from an Indian context, for example, I think the GDP is expected to contract to 1.9% by 2021. So there has been a significant contraction that can get expected in terms of real GDP. Now, this is the chart that IMF has put forth. So they're expecting, as I said, a 3% drop for the global GDP at this point of time, a 1.9% for the Indian context, a 1.2% for the Chinese context. The two main demand drivers for global economy, the US economy and the Eurozone, is expected to contract by 6% and 7.5% respectively for this year. The other emerging economies should have a relatively better show, though their economies might not contract into the negative terrain at this point of time, yet I think the contraction will be quite significant. Now, what the IMF believes with the baseline that we've got for the first half of this year and expected demand recovery coming through the second half, they're more or less expecting a V-shaped recovery coming through from a global GDP perspective and the general economy perspective for individual nations as well. So a large element of a V-shaped recovery expected by the IMF in 2021 gets reflected by the GDP data and the numbers that they've put through. They're expecting India, for example, to grow to 7.4%. So I think Bangladesh is expected to have the maximum growth of 9.5% in terms of GDP stats, followed by China at 9.2 odd percent. Again, I think the similar demand traction can be seen in a lot of Southeast Asian economies, including Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. Generally, I think the global demand supply, as it starts normalizing and it starts, and supply chain starts functioning normally, I think the global GDP is also expected to have a huge bounce back, to almost 5.8% in FY21. So again, I think the two basic presumptions that IMF is doing is that demand is expected to come through quite significantly in the second half of this year, leading to a sharp V-shaped recovery in the global markets in FY21. They also assume that the pandemic will fade in the next few months, and the continuing measures in terms of the great lockdown, as they've discussed in their paper, starts coming off, things start normalizing, and demand-supply dynamics actually start indicating that the worst was probably over. So I think based on these two presumptions, IMF's hope is that we will probably see a V-shaped recovery in the global economy from a GDP perspective, which also includes that global nations will have money supply moving in very, very similar fashions in the second half and the first half of the next financial year. And the corporate earnings should show huge, huge rebound for either economy facing or otherwise at this point of time. Now, just take an interesting stat in terms of how the global stimulus packages have got announced. So the other element which I largely focused upon in terms of how global debt has got stacked up is one angle to be considered. The obvious angle that has been taken gleefully by the markets and why the markets are reacting is in terms of the packages that have got announced. So look at the packages announced by the US. I think there was a 2 trillion package and an excessive 2.3 trillion package as well. So that almost accounts for a huge rise in terms of the GDP from a US perspective. Look at China, look at Japan, look at the UK markets as well. The Canadian markets had a huge fiscal stimulus, almost 3.6%. The Japanese markets, the kind of financial emergency that has got announced within the nation itself, and the kind of GDP numbers that have got announced in terms of the package itself. So I think almost 18 odd percent, similar to what Germany has announced. Look at Singapore, apart from the rebates and reliefs that they are giving in to a lot of corporates, the tax rebates, the waivers in terms of rentals, so on and so forth. We're expected to see Singapore actually having announced 13% in terms of the GDP that got reported for the last reported financial year as well. So totally, I think out of all the packages that have got announced so far, it's almost 5% global GDP that has got announced. Simultaneously, I think there might be more packages that might be in the offing by a lot of other nations at this point of time, and more packages if this pain probably persists over the next few weeks and months. So I think the stimuluses that have got announced probably is expected to take care of the economic pain, of the economic deleveraging that the markets are witnessing at this point of time. But how global supply chains and how global demand comes back, which is a function which is intertwined with each other, I think that is something that needs to be seen and observed at this point of time. So yes, I think the stimulus packages are a welcome sign for the markets. But as I said, this needs to get balanced off with the debt figures, the bond repayments that are coming through, the forex adjustments that need to be done, and how global currencies will behave at this point of time, specifically laying the focus towards the dollar and dollar denominated assets along with gold, which acts as a safe haven at this point of time. Now, in similar context, I think the V-shaped recovery that IMF is talking about, there have been a lot of alphabets that have been put through in terms of market recoveries. I was reading through an article which is also calling out for a W-shaped recovery. So what you've seen is that the first V has probably got observed, where you've seen a huge correction of almost 35 odd percent, a huge bounce back of almost 22 odd percent from the intraday lows. So partial V has got created. A lot of market participants are anticipating for the unknown risks that we are seeing, the downgrades from an earnings perspective, that there might be one leg downwards as well, maybe a couple of leg downwards as more and more data points become relevant from all these perspectives that we are talking about. There might be a one leg downward and then a push through upwards as well, which is indicating towards a W letter that can come through. The obvious letter that we know apart from a V and a W is the U-shaped recovery. So the markets have corrected and they're trying to find their feet at this point of time. Whether they consolidate at this point of time with demand expected to come back very, very softly, the market expected and trying to gauge how the demand comes through, expected to remain extremely volatile during this period, which includes earnings season, which includes how the GDP stats stack up over the next few months and quarters, and that entire demand curve taking a few more quarters to revive. And as market gets the grip over the next few quarters, and the relevant data points are far more solid, far more robust, and as markets are forward looking, as the next few quarters will emanate that the worst is probably over and we're looking for far bigger and greater things over the next few quarters and far greener pasture, that recovery might come through in a U-shaped fashion. There is one more unique geometrical pattern that I probably read about over the last few days. And there was a square root recovery that people were talking about in the market itself. So the square root recovery basically means that the market is what it has exhibited in terms of a V curve till this point of time. The curve then flattens out, which basically means that market consolidates at this point of time with the presumptions here being that the pandemic curve starts flattening out, the flattening curve actually starts going downwards. As I said, the credit risk in the market starts coming off because demand slowly and steadily starts coming back into the market. The supply chain angle also starts moving through. So the demand and supply dynamics from an economic theory perspective and from a money market flow perspective, which includes M1, M2, M3 from a money supply perspective, also starts moving around into the economy, and the liquidity in the system starts getting circulated in a far more defined fashion. And the third element obviously is that As I mentioned earlier, crude prices move a tad bit higher from the current level, which probably gives the sign that as global demand supply comes through, it is expected that crude demand should start coming through, which lends support to the crude prices and the repayment of paper that a lot of crude companies have issued. So I think if you look at this perspective, I think there might be a sideways consolidations once this market and the market recovery has been shown with these presumptions taking place. So large element, putting a context forward before we go through how Nifty recovery has been during previous crisis periods as well, is been two angles. I think the higher probability still rests at this point of time because we're still dealing with a large unknown that I discussed in minute details over the last few minutes, is that there might be one leg downward that the markets might probably exhibit. How much that will be, whether we'll retest our earlier lows, we're not trying to predict that. So I think the market itself will show data points, but there is a high probability that comes towards this element as well. A large context towards this, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that earnings can be hit furthermore rather than what a lot of people on the street or a lot of analysts are expecting. If that earnings hit is far greater, if the demand recovery is delayed, if the pandemic curve also is delayed in terms of recovery, my own sense is that there might be a leg downward for the market. So that's one huge possibility for the market. The second possibility, which also exists at this point of time from a shaped recovery, from an angle recovery for the market, is that the curve actually flattens out and starts moving downwards. Secondly, I think the lockdown elements and the containment elements, as a lot of economies are showing at this point of time, gets released, industrial activity starts coming through, which gets reflected very, very positively from a corporate angle perspective. And even if the first half is assumed to be a washout, it reflects positively in terms of the second half dynamics actually appearing to be far more better. Along with that, I think all the fiscal stimuluses that have got announced and the pay through that actually comes through in terms of how these packages will positively play out on the economy, I think there's a huge leg up because the governments have already provided for that. You're actually going to see pent up demand come back sooner rather than later. And that can have a significance in the market, which basically means that there might not be a significant correction. Yes, volatility and correction might be there as data points get thrown out and strewn out to market participants over the next few weeks and months. But there might not be a huge correction into the market. The market might correct a tad bit from the current levels. There might be profit booking that might be done as certain data points come through. But there might be equal pullbacks that come to the market and there might be a period of consolidation. So broad two angles, I think the recovery that we've probably seen, there might be a high chance of a leg down that still comes through. And the second element is that there might be still a corrective mode to the market, but the market might consolidate, which means that the enthusiasm in the broader markets might still persist. Having said that, if you probably look at the previous crisis periods at this point of time, and let's again go from all the four elements that we have seen in the past. So in the 2004 crisis, for example, and we discussed this, so I'm not touching upon the point in terms of follow-through day action. But again, I think how these follow-through days came through, I think is extremely significant because as data points became far more clearer, the initial pullbacks or the buying that we saw from intraday lows into the market, and as the market started realizing that, there were some inherent corrections that came through. So the markets obviously come into a phase like we are at this point of time, that uncertain zone like we call in the cricket field, when you talk about whether the markets need to push through forward or whether the market needs to correct here with the assumptions of certain factors still remaining extremely soft. Those comprehending points is something that the markets try and identify over the next few months. And this is what precisely our markets will also do over the next few months. What we've seen as historical precedents and anecdotal evidence as well, whether you talk about the global financial crisis, whether you talk about the economic European crisis as well, whether you talk about the paper tantrum, you've not seen in any of these crisis periods a V-shaped recovery play out. Yes, the markets did react abruptly, and that is very, very valid as well, as I said this time around as well, because I think the dual or the triple effects of Corona, crude, and credit risk averseness did imply that earnings will take a hit. So the downfall was assumed to be on valid and legitimate grounds, but whether that V-shaped recovery has happened historically in the past has probably not played out. Therefore, I think that entire concept in terms of the high probability being given to these two elements should be clearly observed and the data points that we discussed. Therefore, I think the follow-through day concept of what we had discussed in our earlier webinars becomes extremely critical as well. So we witnessed earlier follow-through days, but there were equal retracements that happened from the pullbacks that we've seen, because the markets were gestating a lot of data points that were coming its way. And a similar fashion will happen this time around, because over the next few weeks, you'll have multiple data points coming in from multiple sources, whether the pandemic curve is flattening, whether the earnings cycle is worse off or better off than what we were estimating, whether there is actually a need in terms of demand curve remaining extremely soft over the next few quarters than the next few months as one was expecting, and whether I think global economies are still shaping up to open up to other economies from a tourism, from a hospitality perspective, which still accounts a huge component. An interesting statistic here as well is that tourism from a US perspective and hospitality accounts for almost 14% of GDP. For a lot of European nations, for the Australian economy, for a lot of Southeast Asian economies as well, I think tourism is an important and integral component. So if there are these norms and the fear factor still plays out, I think that GDP hit might still get played out quite significantly. And a lot of these sectors might still feel the brunt, which includes your aviation stocks, which includes your hospitality stocks, which includes your leisure stocks as well. So in that respect, whether discretionary spending and high ticket items will get bought into, or those get deferred over a period of time, and people probably become far more prudent in terms of their spending, is something to be seen. Case in point again, TCS, for example, in the recent con call has mentioned and has categorically mentioned that what we are probably witnessing is very, very similar to the global financial crisis. So management calls this time around to everybody who's hearing this webinar that we are conducting is going to be extremely critical. So my earnest request is all the top tier companies that are reporting numbers, the management interviews and the management call, the reading between their lines becomes extremely critical because I think they will be indicating a lot more on how the businesses are shaping up. And if businesses are getting pointed out and are getting the pointed that top managements are inferring and referring to, that there is pain which is similar to 2008, we should be having those facts and our eyes ready for that as well, and the other eye ready as well. So I think having a prudent and a cautious approach, and also observing how the managements are reacting to these numbers and the landscape that they're looking, is extremely critical. So I'll just take a couple of seconds to pause. We've obviously discussed this and how this has happened in the past crisis periods as well. But this is an interesting chart that I want to take you through. So in the 2004 crisis, obviously I think the kind of recovery that one expects took a longer period of time, but there were certain sectors that had unique recovery modes embedded into them. So whether that was a V-shaped recovery, whether that was a U-shaped recovery, I think this chart showed very, very interesting data points. So if you observe for the 2004 crisis, the maximum declines that had happened were Nifty Bank, which includes your Nifty Bank and Nifty Finance, and FMCG, and that declined almost 34% for the Nifty FMCG, and Nifty Finance has declined 27 odd percent. But if you observe, I think the period through the follow-through days that we observed and the subsequent recovery in the market, the V-shaped recovery was shown by the sectors which declined the most in 2004. So Nifty Finance, Nifty Bank, and Nifty FMCG actually emerged as the best sectors in a V-shaped fashion that actually showed the maximum recovery during times of emergence and when the market started reacting in a positive zone as well. So the V-shaped recovery, as we speak about, was displayed by all these three sectors, which also had fallen the most in 2004. Now let's look at how 2008 played out. Now the global financial crisis, obviously a huge crisis during our time periods, and we've not witnessed 1930s, but only read through the books. But 2008 showed us a flavor in terms of how markets can react and how a sharp reaction can get displayed in terms of asset prices. Obviously, I think you had a lot of false signals that came through the market, because the market, as I said, was still trying to gestate and imbibe a lot of information that was getting thrown at it. I'm again saying that in the current context, that in the next few months, as we've seen in the previous context, a lot of data points from all these angles need to get observed, and the markets will react accordingly in terms of gestating these data points and reacting accordingly. But what we've seen in the past, obviously, was how the markets reacted. There were follow-through days observed, but there were corrective modes because there was a lot of data points that were getting thrown and thrown up. What happened in terms of Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, for example, came a few months later, and therefore the markets corrected, as I said, post the second follow-through day. as those data points started coming through. Further data points as they started happening, and as you probably saw a lot of debt being recognized into the system, unemployment claims getting generated at that point of time, almost 2 million to 8 million odd people filed for unemployment claims. And as I said, I think as new jobs started emanating, that took a period of time. So I think what happened in terms of the 2008 crisis was clearly getting displayed by this graph. So I'll take a couple of seconds for you guys to observe the graph that has got played out in 2008. Again, the interesting data point that we saw during 2008. Again, I think the financial sector, because it was more a financial deleveraging and a financial crisis at that point of time, the Nifty Bank, Finance, and Auto were the maximum laggards in the 2008 crisis. Again, largely, if you probably look at the recovery factors, again, I think the sector which had got beaten down the most had a V-shaped recovery, which was quite significant. So Nifty Bank and Nifty Finance had a huge V-shaped recovery into the market. This time around, I think to support these sectors was Nifty IT. So for Nifty IT, it showed a maximum recovery again at that point of time. But I think the sectors which got beaten down the most had the maximum V-shaped recovery as well. So Nifty Bank, Stroke Finance, Nifty Autos, which were getting beaten down, had the maximum recovery. Obviously, I think the beaten down factors was for valid reasons, as I said. The reason is obviously valid when a correction comes through. The market takes its time to gestate, find the bottom, and then when it starts its up move, the market again decides which sectors are going to get positively impacted the most. So all these economic facing sectors also get beaten down to a significant degree to the risk averseness that get played out. But they get the demand revival factor as well, because I think as pent-up demand starts coming back, these are the sectors that show the maximum bounce back, because that is where the maximum demand probably comes through. And again, I think the defensive sectors, which probably appear very, very solid in terms of a downturn, actually become laggards in terms of an up move as well. So in the similar context, you obviously would have seen that Nifty FMCG, Nifty IT would have corrected not as significantly compared to the others. But in terms of an up move as well, I think the sectors also have a relevant say in terms of moving to a certain basis rather than quite significantly in terms of the beta correlation that they have in terms of the economic exposure, as well as the exposure that they probably have within their peer groups as well. So the point I'm trying to raise here is that a lot of the economic facing sectors, yes, they get beaten down the most, but as they find their bases over the next few months, and I think the markets allow them to do that, and the sectors themselves do that, because they just take a lot of data points in terms of demand coming off, operating leverage remaining in very, very weak, price dynamics, pricing not remaining on their side. But as the markets find their base and as they start moving higher, the realization comes through, because I think the inherent demand actually starts coming back very, very strongly for these high beta economic correlated sectors, and that gets played out very, very effectively for them. So in the similar context, 2008 had a similar move for these sectors as well. 2011 again, what you probably saw in terms of the market corrective action, similar patterns as I said. I think follow through days observed. There were again, I think, inherent breakdowns that the market saw. Again, the volatility witnessed, markets showing some up move. Again, I think downturn moves which were significant, but then the last up moves which happened through the last days, and as the market finds support to relevant data points, get reflected in terms of the solid move that comes through. Again, would pause for a couple of seconds to probably help you gestate the graph that happened at that point. Now again, during this period as well, what you're probably seeing is that Nifty Bank and Financial Services, I think this is one sector which gets affected the most. So even during this crisis period, what you've seen in the beating down of banks, whether it's public sector banks, whether it's the smaller private sector banks, the larger private sector banks, the NBFC universe, I think this is one element of the markets which gets beaten down the most. But largely, again, I think 2011 had a very interesting perspective put through. Bank and financial services, I think these indices corrected the most. But when the market reversed, Nifty Pharma and Nifty Auto had a maximum show. Yes, banks will come back, as I said, because I think the demand which comes through for these sectors comes back very, very strongly. But the sectors which outperformed compared to the bank were Nifty Pharma and Nifty Auto at this point of time. Because I think a lot of element during 2011 and 12 was laid out in terms of a lot of approvals coming through for a lot of products through our FDA plants. A lot of our pharma companies were actually having specialty pipelines being displayed, and the cost effectiveness that they were exhibiting through EBITDA margins and optimum operations were getting reflected in higher ROEs, ROCs, which were getting rewarded by the markets. So obviously, I think economy facing sectors did reverse as well in terms of a V-shaped fashion, but pharma was one sector which came out very, very strongly during the 2010-11 crisis period. 2015, again, I think the crisis period elongated, and again, I think the time periods that all of these crises took were on an elongated basis. Here, I think it has been a more of an knee-jerk reaction at this point of time. So 2015, again, I think the first follow-through day was somewhere where I think the decline came through. The second follow-through day is where I think the decline which came through, and when the markets found some feet, had a significant sale. So again, I think take a couple of seconds to pause to probably help you just read the chart during the 2015 crisis. So yes, there was undercutting which also happened in terms of the second follow-through day, which happened in 2015. But the third follow-through day took the markets significantly higher to where we landed up. Now again, during 2015-16, as is very obvious, the bank and financial services declined the most. The rebound again, I think, was displayed by these two sectors as well. So I think there is a huge V-shaped recovery that these sectors exhibit. Again, I think the correlation that these sectors have with the economy is something that you can't take your eyes away with. The reasons, again, as I said, are multi-fold, multi-found. But again, I think the recovery, as the market finds its base and as the economy finds its feet, as I said, in terms of both money supply, money circulation happening, and credit growth normalizing, I think these sectors bounce back the most, because banking, financial services, I think that is the bloodline or the lifeline that economic markets, credit markets, and generally, I think what we need to support any of our needs, either from a business perspective or even from a consumption perspective, whether it's retail loans or corporate loans for that matter. Now, 2020, again, from the all-time high to the intraday corrective low of 7,500, I think there has been a significant correction, significant bounce back in tandem with how the global markets have reacted. This time around as well, I think, as I said earlier, and this is where we are very, very clear, right? When the crisis period starts happening and when a typical downfall starts happening, the defensive comes to the fore. So surprisingly, I think, and there's no surprise, sorry, I think what you probably see in Nifty Pharma and FMCG, I think they correct, I think not in a significant fashion, but they actually displayed signs of a V-shaped recovery in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So here's how we look at things, right? Over the next few weeks, as I said, I think the two perspectives that I put forth, I think the first perspective and high probability that is still getting derived by a consensus view in the market is that there might be a down leg for the market based on certain factors. The second perspective is that there might be a corrective mode in the market, but there might be a huge phase of consolidation, a time-wise consolidation that we are putting through in the market at this point of time over the next few weeks as data points come through. Now, during this period and what we've already got displayed over the last few weeks, pharma and FMCG have shown resilience. And if you probably look at the charts that have got displayed for pharma and FMCG, it's actually showing a V-shaped recovery from the bottom that they formed. It's very, very obvious, as I said, till the point that we reach where the pandemic curve starts coming off, where there are far more positive data points that come through in terms of how the fiscal stimulus is actually starting to work, whether it's for providing paychecks to the unemployed people, whether people have started assuming the fact that demand will come through very, very strongly in the second half. Till that point of time, over the next few weeks and months, I think pharma FMCG might still remain in the limelight. What you've seen in the past and for the previous crisis periods as well, all the economic facing sectors, and specifically, I think banks, financial services, and NBFCs, they have shown a huge beaten down effect. The kind of correction that we've seen both in terms of prices as well as volumes that are coming through in terms of all risk factors that are getting played out for this sector the markets over the next few weeks and months for this sector will actually start finding out a bottom out process. So how the numbers stack out for Q4, how the numbers come in for Q1, and there is a large expectation of a huge degrowth from a book value perspective, from an asset quality perspective, from provisioning that is required for all these sectors as well. So in that all perspective taken into account, all these stocks and all the sectors, all these sectors and the stocks within these sectors will start reacting over the next few weeks and months. But I think the next few weeks and months will also ensure that as proper bottoms are found for these sectors, I think the bounce back will also be equally strong for this sector as well. Now, whether that happens in Q2 or Q3, and the reaction that can come through in terms of a V-shaped recovery for them, specifically for banks and financial institutions, that is something that needs to be observed. But history suggests that that can get played out during this crisis period as well. I think autos might be a unique story because what you're seeing in terms of demand deacceleration along with volume degrowth, I think is getting played out in terms of numbers. The second element that the industry will probably look through along with their ancillary counterparts is how the scrappage policy actually gets announced. So any announcements on that front will be extremely critical. Infrastructure, any capital intensive sectors obviously are going to feel the pinch significantly in the first half. So I think the first half is going to throw a huge amount of earnings downgrades for all these sectors combined together. So if you include cement, capital goods, if you're looking at a lot of the industry intensive sectors, I think all these sectors probably are going to feel the brunt in terms of an earnings downfall or downgrades that will come through. Now, how the recovery happens in terms of industrial demand coming back, there are a lot of government projects on the anvil. The government push through, as I said, in terms of the capital expenditure is expected to take the economy out in the second half. But what we are also typically faced is the unique problem in terms of monsoons hitting us in Q2 as well. So I think Q2 is typically soft for all these industrial facing sectors because of monsoon, and the progress of that actually slows down industrial and economic activity from a capital expenditure perspective. So I think these sectors will show some resilience, but second half is where I think a lot of focus and a lot of pressure points come through. So I think earnings downgrades are a given for this financial year. How they recover largely in the first half of the FY22, I think that largely needs to get observed. So typically, I think how we place ourselves right now is pharma FMCG will have larger earnings resilience. They will take a hit because I think even their factories are not working at optimal capacities. They are still having supply side constraints and issues. The packaging issues are still there, which have been disclosed by a lot of FMCG companies. But as the slowdown and the lockdown pressures are getting released, and as industrial activity is expected to normalize, though albeit at a slower pace, I think these companies' earnings will be far more resilient. So I think till the data points which get thrown out over the next few weeks, I think these sectors will be in focus. Whatever package gets announced, if that gets announced over the next few weeks, I think a lot of sectors which are industrial in nature, you've obviously seen a lot of rally happening in the broader market, whether that's auto ancillaries, road construction companies, a lot of defense players are moving with the hope that sector reliefs will probably come through their way. Even if they come, I think the execution parameters and the cash flow dynamics are still going to take time. So I think one must take that with a pinch of salt as well. Obviously, one may ask that there is a feeling of missed out, there is a FOMO feeling in the market as well. But largely, again, I think if you would have alluded to all the data points that have probably put through in terms of what needs to get understood from the context of the other elements that the market will try to gestate, and we've seen this in the past, that markets will try to gestate all the other elements that I've discussed today over the next few weeks and months, and there might be abrupt reactions that might be coming into the markets as well. So I think we should effectively be playing out pharma FMCG very, very selective in terms of certain sectors which will show resilience. I think a few of the specialty chemicals will also have a huge sales. A lot of production capacities and de-risking will start happening from a global scale as the pandemic gets over, from a global perspective. And that is where our capacities stand at this point of time, very, very solidly compared to China. We are still lagging in terms of textiles, and that's where I think the Bangladesh figure in terms of a 9.5% GDP growth still stands out quite significantly. Yarn prices have taken a huge hit, which means we are almost trading at inventory losses. How oil and gas prices move up have a huge say for cash flow and earnings for upstream, downstream companies. Though gas distribution companies are a unique model of their own. Yes, they will take a huge hit as well. because a lot of petrol pumps and CNG stations are closed, but PNG demand remains extremely strong. They've got stronger balance sheets, so they might be very, very resilient in this space as far as earnings recovery is concerned. Having said that, I think all these perspectives need to be taken into account. I've put forth my and our standpoint in terms of how we look at the market at this point of time, and how all these relevant data points need to be considered when you're probably taking a constructive view of the markets. Now, I think it's time for queries, so I'll be just taking a few questions in that perspective. I'll also be joined by my colleague Rushit, so we'll be able to answer questions in a far more effective manner over the next few minutes.
Hello. So I think before people start the queries, I think few of them are writing. So there are a lot of questions coming that will we get this presentation? Will this video will be available? So yes, you will be getting the recording of this today's presentation at least by tomorrow evening. And you will get emails, and you can also find on our YouTube channels and blogs. So that's not an issue. You will get the full recorded presentation over there.
Yeah, so I'll start off with the first question. Dipankar Nayak had a question about the metal sector. So Dipankar, I think, and for everybody as well, I think metal sector is really getting pointed out in two directions, right? So there is a ferrous space and a non-ferrous space as well. It depends clearly in terms of demand-supply dynamics. You've obviously seen supply constraints come through because of the lockdown pressures. A lot of Chinese factories not not operating at full optimal capacities at this point of time. But the second element is also the slowness in demand that one expects. If you look at the demand supply dynamics from a ferrous perspective as well as a non-ferrous perspective, a lot of economies, specifically in Western Europe, North America, Latin America as well, are still under lockdown pressures. It's an obvious sign that the LME realizations are expected to remain extremely soft going forward. Now, how does this demand cyclical recovery play out over the next few quarters is going to be extremely interesting. What you've probably seen and what you've probably observed in terms of Chinese HRC and CRC prices, which is the hot rolled cold and the cold rolled cold prices, and if you also account for the ex-FOB prices at this point of time. So a lot of factories and ports have started operating out of China. I think the deliveries are still not being accepted globally at this point of time. You've seen actually contraction in terms of HRC, CRC prices at this point of time. What also happens is in terms of the realization itself. So a large element in terms of a lot of metal reports that I go through is that the expectations in terms of steel prices, zinc prices, lead prices, copper prices are expected to remain extremely soft. Nickel was the strong outperformer as I discussed in the last webinar as well, but even that has seen a sharp contraction. So I think metal sector typically is a sector which works very strongly on operating leverage. It has to be driven strongly by volumes along with price realization. Input costs specifically from a metals perspective, whether it's bauxite, iron ore, coking coal, I think that had shown contraction, but that also has seen some amount and an element of rise over the last few weeks, which means that the entire operating leverage in terms of demand remaining soft, which means volumes are soft, pricing not on their side, expected pricing to contract to help push through whatever producing or the offsetting of production that they're probably doing, and input cost actually moving a tad bit higher, along with their currencies depreciating at this point of time, clearly indicates that the reported EBITDA per ton might remain extremely soft. So I think metals as a sector might still exhibit softness, both in terms of reported numbers on a quarter as well as an annualized basis. So Rishit, you can take one query before I go to the next.
Sure. So there is one query regarding the debt, increasing global debt and all these things. So see, if you look at the government debt issuance, it has hit an all-time high. I think over the 2.1 trillion in March, if we calculate. If you use a simple top-down estimation, like if net government borrowing gets doubled from the 2019 level, on which we are already moving on that track, and there is let's say consider, as IMF is saying, around 3% contraction in the global economic activities in a nominal terms. I think the world debt could pile up and it could surge from, as already we have discussed, from 322% of GDP to over 340 to 350% of the GDP. And this is where the issue will arise. And I think it will have a spillover effect over the next few quarters also. And as we already discussed in one slide, and that was very elaborative about how the payment cycle is due by the end of 2020, around $20 trillion is due. Especially there can be impact from the emerging economy. So I think there were a couple of charts. So the first one was of the emerging economies and around $6 trillion from there. So that becomes a pain, that how will the emerging economy come up with that payment on time. So yes, with all these things, there is an issue, but the main thing, as IMF also told, that let's see how the pandemic plays out. So the expectations are there that after May, after June, the things would have start flatten up, and there could be some recovery in the H2 also. And that if that happens, then as expected, there can be some 4 to 5% growth in the developed economies like US, Europe, and 7 to 9% in India, China, and all these economies. So let's see how the things play out where the pandemic ends. I think most of the governments are fighting really well. Yeah, the lockdown will impact for sure, but if it starts opening in a phased manner, like I think now most of the countries are trying to do that. So yes, let's see how these things play out. Over to you, Mahesh.
Yeah, just give me a minute. I think I just stacking up a lot of questions that are coming through. Yeah, so I think there is one particular question that has got asked by. Just a minute. Just a minute. Sorry. Yeah, so there's a particular question on the developments that have taken place over the last week, right? Last day or so, where the government has actually started blocking out investments that are coming in from China in listed entities. If you have a look and a perspective as well, the Chinese investments are there both in the listed and the unlisted space as well. So what the Chinese strategy has been, and it's not just for an Indian context, but for the global context as well. I think it's on two counts. One is acquiring intellectual assets or intellectual property rights, either through digital startups or within the digital ecosystem itself. And the second element has obviously been to take out or take down hard assets as well. Case in point, I think the port in Sri Lanka, everybody would have read through that news. I think they lend very, very effectively for a lot of these emerging economies. And if they're not able to repay, I think they take over these assets. The second element also is, if you read across the article in The Economist a few years down the line, there was a huge uproar which got created because China was buying huge chunks of land in the African and the sub-Saharan nations. So there again, I think from a food security perspective, I think it was more a targeted move. So it's this dual effort that China probably does, not just from an Indian context, from a global perspective as well. From the Indian context, if you look at both the spaces, the listed and the unlisted space, I think what the government has probably done is a very, very proactive move, which should be appreciated at this point of time. Because I think if you're probably having a far larger interest, say, from sovereign entities, I think it's a free market, yes, at the end of the day, but I think it should be ruled in terms of investment as a perspective and not as a strategic stake that this can be perceived as a lot of central bankers can take in listed entities. So yes, there was a sufficient stake that was already there within HDFC that the Chinese entity had done. They had increased it marginally, but they've got far larger stakes in the unlisted ecosystem. So I think if you probably look at the unlisted ecosystem at this point of time, and a majority of all the startups that are doing phenomenally well in India, I think the Chinese investments are quite significant. So I would not see this as anything which is affecting the markets negatively, I think it's a good proactive move and a protective move that the government has done at this point. Rushit, over to you.
Yeah, so Anil has one question that if the market is to make a new low again, like if you think that market is correct, will correct again, then what is the first one or two signal to look for technically? So Anil, according to O'Neill, we always discuss about the distribution day whenever the market is in a confirm upgrade. Say for example, right from 7,500 market is move all the way to 92, 9,300. And in this market has gone through rally attempt like 3 to 4 days of an attempted rally. Then there was a follow through day which was very strong, and there was a very good momentum after the follow through day. So now you should look for the distribution day. So what does distribution day ideally means? It is when the market is down, like say for example Nifty, a benchmark index is down more than 0.2% on a volume which is higher than the previous session volume, then we consider that as a distribution day. So ideally, the distribution day is a signal that there is something wrong with the market, and there are high chances that market is losing its thrust now. So if you find that there are 2 to 3 distribution day accumulating, then that is the point where you should trim your position, or you should be very careful when you are taking a new position, because the market is weakening. As the number of distribution day increases, you will see that market is weakening. So before this crash in the last month also, so market we had identified that there were around 5 to 6 distribution days accumulating at around the higher levels. Say for example, somewhere around 11,800 to 12,200. When the market was in that range, we saw some 4 to 5 distribution day accumulation, and we had already warned our clients that there is something wrong in the market, and we are in a under pressure situation. And we had also trimmed few positions and booked some profit and cut losses. And so this is what similarly needs to be done at this point of time also. So distribution day is the one important thing. The second, I think, if you are asking, then it is the downside reversal. So whenever, say for example, the Nifty is up 3% a day, and if you see in the last hour or so, then there is a downside reversal. Or if you even see that in the second half, the market is coming off its high, and it closes in the bottom range of the day. Say for example, 200 points of rally, and if it closes just 50-60 points higher, then it is closing in the bottom range of the day. So yeah, that is not a good indication. So you can look at these two things, distribution day and the downside reversal. And the best thing is you can follow our daily big picture commentary, where you get all the ideas of daily how the market went through and what we are looking forward.
Thanks, Rushit. Sumit Savla had a question, and his question was quite elaborately put. So he's saying that sentiment is completely missing in these presentations. In fact, we are comparing all recessions. When we are comparing with all recessions, it itself speaks of the pessimism we are having. In 2008 till October, not many souls were ready to think beyond a 20% bull market correction. Absolutely right, Sumit. I think sentiment is one angle that cannot get gauged. So that's the first part. Yes, you can have a feeler done in terms of how market participants are looking at the market in terms of the volatility, in terms of how the VIX is shaping up, how volumes are shaping up. But again, I think if you have read through the articles, Parag Parikh has written many beautiful articles in terms of investor psych and so on and so forth. If you have not read that, or if you have read that, or others have not read that, I think my request is clearly go through all that. Because I love reading, and you need to read through all these perspectives that are required in the market. And he's put a brilliant piece in terms of how investments and investor psyche and sentiments play out at this point of time. The second element, obviously, is that when we speak about the earlier crisis periods as well, we are actually trying to point out and trying to gauge how history has evolved in the past. If you read through our earlier two reports with we've actually created 2 to 3 good reports in terms of whether history is a precedence enough for finding market bottoms, why a follow through day is extremely important and critical in terms of gauging and finding market direction as well. And therefore, I think the O'Neill methodology in terms of distribution days, as Rushit was speaking about, even for this crisis periods, if you're understanding, if you know about the distribution day concept, I think if the distribution day stack up starts happening on a far larger scale over a period of 4 to 6 weeks, and if the market starts changing its market direction, I think our assumptions and presumptions were that you should start slowly and steadily taking money off the table. I think it's better waiting on the sidelines, conserving capital, and assuming the markets to tell us when to enter the market rather than trying to become very, very ambitious at this point of time. So this philosophy and methodology has worked absolutely fine. I'm not saying that it's a foolproof methodology, but I think this methodology is something that has been working for the US markets over the last 50 years, has been historically tested, and it has worked even in this crisis period as well. So yes, sentiments have to be taken into account. Market is a combination of a lot of factors. So sentiments is one angle to it. As I said in my presentation and in my commentary within that as well, I think within these bounce back periods as well, you also get a huge feeling of being missed out. There'll be a lot of talk, अरे यार मैं stock miss किया, I think ये stock 20% चल गया, अभी क्या करें, so on and so forth. Markets are never like that. I think if you analyze the fundamentals of the market, if the markets are giving you a good structure from a technical base, you will always find the markets at different points of time giving you good entry opportunities. So sentiments, how markets are behaving, fundamental factor, data points being thrown out by the markets, what charts are indicating, everything needs to be considered. But yes, as I said, read the articles, read the books that Parag Parikh had given. If you have not, even if anybody has not written, I think it's a brilliant piece that Mr. Parikh had put out in all his earlier articles, all his notes as well. And the second element is that, as I said, keep a view out on management commentaries this time around as well, because management commentaries effectively give a gauge in terms of the investor sentiment or the business sentiment at their end, which can also be read through between the lines, as I said. Over to you,
Rishabh. So Parag has one question related to crude oil, that what is the cost of different companies, and can crude sustain at a very low level, say for example below $20 a barrel. So it all depends upon the supply and demand and how the geopolitical talks goes. Like, so I think last month there was some face off between Russia and Saudi Arabia, and that had turned ugly, adding to a third sea in the current market correction. So yeah, the crude was significantly down during that time, but there are some positive developments around Saudi and Russia talks in the last week that we saw. But yes, sustaining below $20 is quite difficult, because if you think for most of the US firms, the average price is around, as ST consensus say, it's around $40 to $45 per barrel. If you come to Saudi and Russia, it's somewhere around $25 to $30 per barrel, and it has been estimated that for ONGC also it is around $35 to $40 per barrel. So crude sustaining at such a bottom price of less than 20 is a very different scenario, and I won't like to comment on the probability, but yeah, it's a difficult scenario. But the silver lining is that if the crude remains below some $40-50 per barrel, then it's very good for India. So we know that our export bill for the bill is around $112 billion if you consider 2018-19, and if it is estimated that if the price remains around $30 to $35 per barrel, then India can save around $50 billion in the crude oil import bill. So this is a huge amount when we are already in a fiscal crunch, and we need to generate some packages also to fight the COVID-19. Even if the crude oil sustains around $50 per barrel, then also India can save about $30 to $35 billion. So that's a huge amount. So let's hope for the positive and how the thing goes on. So over to you, Laura.
yeah, so Disha Agarwal had a question. I think, what measures should Indian government adapt to woo the multinational flying off from China? Now, Disha, that's a very difficult proposition, because what you've seen in terms of the Chinese machinery that has got built and erected over a period of time, what it contributed in terms of 2001, 2002, around 5 odd percent of GDP. They're almost 35-40% of GDP contribution on a global scale at this point of time. The second element, if you look at the entire ports and their manufacturing units at the southern end of China, the Guangdong province, as we talk about, I think the factories are so huge and there are so many producing lines that the leverage that they probably create and the scale that they create in terms of producing units, for the outsourcing concept, obviously, I think the per unit cost is significant lower compared to any other country or any other economy. So have a significant transition to have that kind of scale, I think, is going to take time. But yes, I think post this crisis and as we get out of this, I think a lot of economies are probably going to estimate in terms of having over reliance on one economy in general. How the other economies stack up against that is going to be extremely critical, and how supportive the government policies are. So part of the trade shift in the US-China trade war as well has actually emerged, and that has been seen very, very positively for countries like Vietnam, for example. The Bangladesh textile sector, for example, has done amazingly well. New industries have sprouted in a lot of Southeast Asian economies, like in Indonesia, even Malaysia to a certain extent. So how the policies stack up, because there are huge issues from an Indian context, clearances, land acquisitions, the taxability issues. So I think anything which gets resolved in a timely fashion, and we are actually in a very, very sweet spot over the next few years. And I think the government is expected to work very, very proactively and positively in direction with the Make in India program. If that happens over the next few years, and even if we achieve 1/4 of the scale of what the Chinese companies were doing, I think there a significant transition would happen. But yes, the government is trying to do that. I think a lot of proactive steps are being taken from the government, both in terms of the DIPAM department as well as expectations in terms of getting the Made in India probably move in a far faster accelerated traction. So I think that the scenario will change over the next few quarters and years, but it will take time. So I think a drastic shift will still take time. So I think we'll still be dependent, as I said. And there's a follow-up question on specialty chemicals. So specialty chemicals is also uniquely placed from the Indian context, because what you had seen even pre-COVID as a time period, the specialty chemical companies were better off because the Chinese government, both in terms of the effluent discharge norms that they put forth, the environmental norms, which also gets affected in terms of effluent discharge, and also the global demand in terms of de-risking in terms of supplier chain. And the Indian players, which probably stood up both from an effluent discharge perspective as well as providing all the necessary elements which are required for various applications across various sectors, whether it's paints, dyes, plastics, oil and gas, so on and so forth. I think specialty chemicals as a space stands out very, very clearly. Yeah. So I think, as I said, till we find the pandemic curve bottoming out, till the sustainability in food prices happen, I think specialty chemicals can also emerge as a hotspot over the next few years. Over to you, Kush.
So there are a few questions regarding our past articles and any offers for the product and all those things. So you can email that queries to our sales team. They will get back to you with if there are any offers and where to find the past articles that we have written. These all are available on Marcus Smith India's website. Sumit has commented that he has been following O'Neill since 2006-7. Great to know that, Sunil. So he is the right person who might be knowing that how efficiently we have been able to track the market, and whenever the market is falling, we have been able to come out of the market well before when the market was near its high, and that is due to the capital preservation. So which is very important this time also. You never know when the bottom will form. So instead of predicting being in the game of prediction, it's always better to be on the sidelines and see how the market is observing. And if we particularly talk about this time, that how will the things play out, then it's very difficult to say that in terms of story how the things will go, because if you see during the financial collapse of 2007 and the recession that followed, so it left many economists and many big pundits left unsaid that what is happening, why is it happening, and all were asking around the globe that to the big economists that why didn't you see it coming, and there were no answers, no correct answers. I will say that why didn't you see it coming. But this time around the situation is very difficult. There is no question like why didn't you see it coming, because since last 2 to 3 months everyone was knowing that yeah, this virus is spreading a bit more and more in the different countries and it is going global. And so there was an expectation of these kind of situation globally, but yes, the condition is known. Even IMF in last week told that you can't predict that how the things will play out, how the impact of virus will flatten and what the game will be. So it's better to be the follower of a rule-based methodology. So you should have a good rules whenever you are trading or you are investing in such a market, and that will help a lot to you. Uh, Capital preservation, taking small positions, using pyramiding strategies, buying at a proper buy point. So always going for leaders. So like in our portfolio also currently we have few leading stocks which are at their all-time high, and that's what O'Neill always advocate for, that never afraid to go for a stock that is at all-time high, 52-week high. That N factor always plays out. So you should know, and that's a quite simple logic, that if something is trading at a premium price, if not only stock, if any merchandise is at a higher price, then there is something, there is a quality in that. So if investors are buying even in this market few of the stocks, then there is a reason why they are buying the stocks. And yes, so always remember the capital preservation, the correct time to buy, the correct time to sell, distribution day, downside reversal. So all these from the O'Neill methodology can really help you when the situation is that no one is able to predict that how the stories around this virus and the global economy, etc., will play out. So yeah, it's better to wait and watch the things whenever the market gives a good opportunity, whenever the index is at good level, few of the stocks are doing really well. Always look for the relative strength line. That's we always told. So if you go to Marketsmith India, any chart, so there is price strength rating. That is particularly the relative strength. So you should look for that. Then what is the buyer demand? So in these kind of market, I particularly we like the buyer demand and relative strength line both playing well. So if the buyer demand is say for example A or 90, 92 with 99 rating be the highest according to O'Neill, then that's a really good thing that even in this market there is a high buyer demand. Means general institutional investors, the big HNI players, these are the people who want to buy it. And then you can go to the volume side also, that whenever the RS line is higher, the buyer demand is good. And if you think that, if you see that the volume is also higher along with the price going up, then that's these are the very good indications. So over to you, Varesh.
So there's one question by Milandeep. He wants a view on Bajaj Finance. Now, whatever preliminary numbers Milandeep Bajaj Finance has come out with, uh, on a year-on-year basis, they might look reasonably okay. But if you look on a quarter-on-quarter basis, I think the softness is very much something that needs to get exhibited at this point of time. So as we are expecting, I think with the lockdowns, advances growth remaining extremely slow and soft, these sector exposures also need to be extremely critically understood and interpreted at this point of time. So how much of an SME, MSME exposure is there, which is still quite significant? Yes, consumer durables are something which Bajaj Finance has been growing upon over the last few quarters. But whether that takes a hit, as I mentioned earlier as well, a lot of these discretionary spending items, specifically the high bucket items, might actually get deferred as this pandemic and the post-pandemic effects on a spillover part happen on the economy and in individual discretionary spending perspective as well. This actually stacks up in terms of asset quality pressures actually throwing up on a larger scale, larger provisioning required, which again I think has an implied impact on the cash flows and the asset liability mismatch, specifically in terms of the cash flow management that they have to do. No doubt, I think it's managed very, very well, both from a liquidity perspective, from a capital adequacy perspective, from a bandwidth perspective. The tier one ratios are extremely strong. The corporate governance is extremely good, and the multiples from a price to book or a price to adjusted book have also come off significantly. But my opinion is, let it come off. Let the result come off in Q1. Let us just it, as I said, I think, and then try and read between what the management lines are. If you go on the BSE site, there is an analyst call which happens. If you're not able to attend that, I think there is entire transcripts which comes through. I think that transcripts also throws a lot of data, and this quarter particularly and the next, I think all these management transcripts, specifically for all these leadership companies, are going to be extremely critical on how they are viewing the landscape, and how the companies, specifically their companies, are shaping up to take care of the after effects that happen, right? Because they are better placed over the next 1-2 quarters, as we've seen in the past. These spaces react quite significantly over the next few quarters after that. So I think the next few quarters are a critical junction for them, but they also ensure that because of their business models, they take care of their competitors, and the ability to take competition head on is gets reflected in numbers. So I think that's my humble opinion. I think you can take a few last questions, Rushit, and then I can have my final comments put through.
Yeah, I think most of things are covered, but again, couple of questions regarding specialty chemical and understanding related to this. Then I think, Milind, we have a detailed report on specialty chemical, that how the leading specialty chemical companies, what are their growth drivers, how they stand on O'Neill point of view, and especially what are the things that are falling in place for Indian chemical in specialty chemical market. So yeah, you can just ask our sales team for that specialty chemical report, and they will provide you a link for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Thanks. Yeah. Anything else, Rushit? You want to try?
I think most of them are covered.
Yeah. So I think Ajay had a question before I just have my closing comments. Ajay had a question whether we can expect the markets to fall further to 6,500, 7,000 odd levels. Ajay, if you go to my Twitter ID, I think one of my earlier tweets, and this is just a technical historical representation, nothing that can get played out. We had actually drawn parallels between 2008 and 2020. Again, I think the kind of falls and pullbacks that we've seen, I think we've already covered 2 legs here. And both the legs were very, very similar in terms of falls and pullbacks. So the pullback that you're seeing of 23-25 odd percent, a similar pullback was also seen in 2008 in the second leg. The third leg I obviously don't want to discuss here, because the third leg of 2008 was really, really scary, which I've seen and shown in my graph as well. I hope that does not happen. But largely, again, yes, I think those stats are there. I think we've mentioned 3 elements on what can go wrong if it goes wrong, and if the market does correct. So yeah, I think as I said, the 2 perspectives, there might be a leg down. How significant? I think we put that perspective on a Twitter ID. It might or might not play out, but one needs to be cautious and selective about stocks. And the second element, as I said, is market volatility continuing, data points getting thrown out, but then markets consolidating as well. Yeah. So thank you everyone to take time out from your Sunday. It was a pleasure speaking to you guys. You guys stay safe, stay healthy. See you next Saturday for the next round of webinar. Thank you so much.